Dr. Dave Janda, and welcome back to Caravan to Midnight. You know, it is an honor, an absolute honor to be working with the iconic John B. Wells and to become a member of the Caravan to Midnight family. I am absolutely blessed and honored to be a part of this great organization and this great family. You know, folks, in addition to my Caravan to Midnight show, I also host another show every Sunday entitled Operation Freedom. I've been hosting that show since October of 2010. It airs every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern out of the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Michigan, out of our Freedom Bunker based at Wham Talk 1600 Studios. I encourage you to listen, and you can listen live by streaming the show at davejanda.com every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern. Now, if you miss the show, not to fear, not to worry. We have it up in podcast form for you. Usually by Sunday evening, we have the show up in podcast form for you at davejanda.com. I encourage you to go to davejanda.com any time of the day or night, download the shows, and network that information to anyone and everyone you know. In addition to the Dave Janda site, I also host a YouTube channel under the name of Operation Freedom, or you can, in the search engine, just put Dave Janda. I do 1 to 2, 5 to 6 minute YouTube presentations every week on current events and geopolitical issues. Again, utilize them, network them. The way we empower people is by educating them and by providing information that the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will never provide. In addition, we have a wellness and prevention site, that being operationfreedomhealth.com. I encourage you to go there. We have great information on that site as well. You know, folks, every week in our Freedom Bunkers, whether they're based in Ann Arbor, Michigan with my radio show Operation Freedom, or here at the Caravan to Midnight Bunker, we dissect current events that are impacting you, your family, your business, and our country. And my promise to you is that we will bring and will continue to bring guests and information that the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will never provide. They won't provide it because it doesn't fit in their preconceived, politically correct, bought-off agenda, or because, folks, they're petrified. They're petrified of what might happen if they actually tell you what you need to know. I like to start off my show every Monday and Thursday with a WTF segment. WTF is going on behind the curtain. But I'd like to change it up a little bit today. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on WTF is going on in healthcare and the healthcare reform packages that are continually being presented to the American public and actually being implemented in some cases, i.e. Obamacare, and really causing some devastating effects. You see, folks, you're not being told what's really going on behind the curtain by the fake media. You see, because if the fake media did that, they'd lose huge advertising revenue. Do you know how many millions of dollars the fake media gets every year lying in their pockets from the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry? Huge. Tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. And for that hundreds of millions of dollars, they're not providing you information you need to know. You see, folks, my focus in medicine has really been on two fronts. One has been on treating people that have sustained injuries. I've been doing that as an orthopedic surgeon for 32 years. But there's another side of what I do, and that is as it relates to what I believe is one, if not the most important aspects of medicine, and that's prevention. Over the years, I've realized that it's really all about the power and profit of prevention. As a means of cutting healthcare costs, as a means of keeping people safer and healthier, to keeping society in a better functioning state. It's really the key, I believe, to what I do. Yes, I've over 32 years helped. I've operated on 15,000 folks. I've seen over 130,000 people in the clinic trying to take care of them after they've had an injury or a problem arise. But actually, when I look back at my career, probably the most meaningful work I've done has been on the prevention front. And what I'd like to do is provide you a foundation of what prevention is all about and how it can positively affect you and every person you know, as well as every person in our country and around the world. It's, I believe, the most important aspect of medicine. Yet, if I look at my training, medical school, internship, residency, fellowship, about 95% of my training focused on, okay, if an event occurs and a person gets injured, here's how to take care of them, Dave. And 5% or less of my training was on prevention. So you're asking the question, look, Dave, if prevention is so important as you contend, why did it get so little emphasis in your training and every physician's training? And I could give you a lot of diplomatic answers. My audience at Operation Freedom will tell you I'm not a diplomat, and I think from the several shows that we've had together on Caravan to Midnight, I think you already know that I'm not a diplomat. You see, the answer is there's no money in prevention. There's no money in it. I can attest to that. And you see, that's what drives what happens, and not in medicine, not only medicine, but in every field, the money. You know, Churchill was fond of saying, you make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give. I have made a living in taking care of people as an orthopedic surgeon after they sustain an injury. But where I believed I've made a life for myself is my giving over the decades to the prevention world. And I can tell you that that was a decision that was based on a very difficult time in my life. When John B. Wells initially had me on Caravan to Midnight as a guest, we got into this, but I think it bears repeating because many people say, you know, Dave, since you got involved in this prevention thing, you've gotten the sports industry mad at you, you've gotten big medicine mad at you, you've gotten the pharmaceutical industry mad at you, you've gotten big insurance industry mad at you, you've gotten big medicine such as the AMA mad at you. You get everybody mad at you, and they get pretty nasty, and they do. In fact, at one point in our work in prevention, we were making so many waves and taking on the powers that be and upsetting their financial bottom line, because that's the common denominator with all these folks. It's their bottom line, how much money they're making. They were not only threatening to sue me based on our findings that show that their products weren't effective or actually causing injury, but they were threatening bodily harm to myself. And when that didn't seem to stop me, at one point we had to get protection for my wife and kids. Yeah. That's how sinister these people are. They are globalists. They don't care about society. That's what I started to run into early on. They don't care about society. They don't care about people. They care about one and only thing: money. So people say, Dave, why do you do this prevention stuff? This is nuts. You don't get paid anything to do it. You put your life on the line. Your family gets threatened. They're always threatening to sue you for telling the truth. You take a lot of time doing it. Why do you do it? It goes back to July 28th, 1989. You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give. You see, at that point in my life, I was in a crossroads. I had been working on research that focused on developing operations to help people after they were injured. That was a good thing to do, I believe. And I was also focusing on some prevention work. And I was at a crossroads. Was I going to focus on prevention, or was I going to focus on developing operations to help people? In other words, being proactive versus being reactive. And then something very terrible happened in our family's lives. At the time, we had one child, a pretty little red-haired girl. She was about a year old, and she became very, very ill. So ill that she had to be hospitalized. She was hospitalized because her bone marrow stopped functioning. And the concern was that she either had cancer or she had a very debilitating virus that had attacked her bone marrow system and had shut it down, both being bad, the worst being obviously cancer. And my friends, who were very good at treating people, reacted, and they started treating Allison. And as the days went on, the treatments weren't working. And it got to the point where when she was admitted to Mott's Children's Hospital at the University of Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, she progressively got worse. And she was not responding to the treatments my friends were trying to institute. And at one point, she lost consciousness. And my friends came to me and said, "Look, Dave, we're doing everything we can. Allison is not responding. She might not make it." At that point, I did what thousands of parents do in children's hospitals every year in the United States, and hundreds of thousands do around the world. I picked her up out of her crib and held her, and I said a prayer. The only person in the room was my dad. And as I said the prayer, I asked God to take my life and not hers. And as I said that prayer, something happened that has never happened before in my life. I heard a voice. Yeah, I heard a voice. And the voice told me to focus on prevention and establish an institute. I opened my eyes, and the only person in the room was my dad, but it wasn't my dad's voice. I looked at my dad and I said, Did you say something to me? And he looked at me and he said, No. But if you heard a voice, follow it. I closed my eyes, I finished the prayer, and something that I can only characterize as a miracle happened. A couple minutes later, Allison opened her eyes for the first time again and started to speak. So when folks ask me, Dave, why do you do this? Why do you put up with all this grief? Why do you keep hitting your head against the wall? This is an exercise in futility. Why? The answer? July 28th, 1989. On that day, my daughter's life was saved. And so was mine. And on that day, I dedicated myself to the world of prevention. Now, that next day, I started on my mission. I had no idea what to do. I established an institute. I'm going to establish an institute. I don't even know how to do that. But I figured it out. And as I started to figure it out, I realized I need to get help in this. And I have to say, many people at the time said, Dave, nobody's going to help you do this. Nobody's going to want to get involved. And I actually found a number of people around the world that were involved in prevention research and asked them to come on a board of directors for this institute I was creating. And they agreed. And then I decided I was going to set up an advisory board of former professional and Olympic athletes to discuss the issues of injury and the ramifications and the role of prevention. And many people said, Dave, you're nuts. You're never going to get anyone of high stature to come aboard. I didn't listen to the naysayers and doomsayers throughout this course. And what I did is I started calling. And what I found were people that said, yeah, I want to get involved in this because this is that important. No one else in the world is doing this. One of the first people I called was Walter Payton. Walter Payton was my childhood idol in sports. He played for the Chicago Bears. The best, I don't care what anybody says, the best running back in football history. I called Walter Payton. I talked to a representative of his, and that person said, let me get him to call you back. He called me back. We had a nice discussion, a long discussion. I asked him to come on our advisory board, and he said, absolutely. And he goes, but there's one contingency. I want to work on getting other people involved as well. Walter never asked me for a penny for his time and his effort. He was with us the whole time, from the very beginning. He brought other former professional Olympic athletes aboard. He served as the kind of chairman of the advisory board. Whether it was Bonnie Blair, the Olympic athlete, or Nadia Comaneci, or Bart Connor, or Peggy Fleming. He brought in Johnny Unitas, his teammate Mike Singletary. They all came aboard willingly. Walter was an inspiration to me as a younger individual, but he came even more inspirational to me of how he was off the field. It was through his help that we developed the Institute for Preventative Sports Medicine. At the time, it was the only prevention institute of its kind in the world that focused on prevention and the costs that could be saved in the healthcare industry by focusing on prevention. And that was in 1989. And here we are, almost 3 decades later, and it's still the only organization of its kind that focuses on prevention, and in particularly the healthcare costs that can be prevented with the utilization of prevention techniques. And why is it the only one? Because there isn't any money in it. You see, the one fallacy I had when I started this based on our track record was, well, with your track record, Dave, and the research you've done previously at the University of Michigan in prevention, this is a no-brainer. Signing up folk, getting corporate involvement, getting the insurance industry involved to support this kind of work. And I was really wrong. The Institute has never received 1 penny of funding from the insurance industry. Big business, although it would benefit every business, small, medium, and large in our country and around the world, have not been that supportive financially of what we do or how we do it. We run the Institute on a shoestring. I donate my time as director, have since its inception, on July 28, 1989. You know, it's interesting because as far back as 1988, the National Academy of Sciences went on record as saying the following: injury is probably the most under-recognized major public health problem facing the nation today, and the study of injury represents unparalleled opportunities for reducing morbidity and mortality, and for realizing significant savings in both financial and human terms, all in return for a relatively modest investment, end quote. The National Academy of Sciences made that statement in 1988, and to date, they continue to make that statement, as do a number of people around the world. It's the most under-recognized major public health problem in our country. And it's the biggest bang for the buck we can make for any money invested in the research. Just look at the statistics. Let's just look at the United States. This is not worldwide. Multiply these statistics by 10 for around the world. Injuries kill greater than 142,000 Americans every year in our country. Injuries lead 62 million Americans to seek medical attention. Injuries are the single greatest killer in folks aged 1 to 44. And injuries cost our country greater than $150 billion minimum every year. That's the bad news. The good news? The vast majority of those injuries are completely preventable. Now, this came out from the University of Chicago. A 10% decrease in fatalities related to injury would increase the economic benefits for Americans still living by $1.3 trillion with a T. Yet, big corporations, big business don't support it. You know, we've made the case over the years that the globalist syndicate is this incestuous relationship between big business and big government. You see, the globalists want all the power and the control, and understand why they don't support prevention. It's because it doesn't empower them. It empowers you. It puts you, if you will, in control of your healthcare life. It makes you safer and healthier. You see, the globalists are in the sick and dying business. That's how they make money. They don't make money in the health and wellness business. And that's why they don't support this. And that is the conclusion. It took me many years to realize that. Many years. And in fact, many times I'm fighting big business just to do the right thing for their own employees. You know, I once had a domestic automobile company come to me and say, you know, Dr. Janda, we're spending $2 billion in healthcare costs, and you do some of this prevention stuff, and, you know, we're not going to donate to the Institute, but can you help us, and of course free, can you help us in trying to maybe see if there's something that we can do to save money? My response is, wait a minute. Why don't we focus on the people, not the dollars? They were only interested in the dollars. But at the time, they were spending $2 billion in healthcare costs. And I said, well, do me a favor. Go through your records and tell me how much you're spending on injury. Well, okay. And it took them a long time, but they came back to me and they said, you know, that $2 billion, we're spending on $150 million on injuries in the workplace. And we're spending another $400 million on injuries outside of the workplace when folks that we employ get hurt. They were spending $550 million out of a $2 billion healthcare budget on injury. And that's not the exception to the rule. Remember, the National Academy of Sciences, what they said. Injury is the most under-recognized major public health problem facing our nation today. In fact, just look at students, kids. 4 million students will seek emergency room treatment for sports injuries per year in the United States. Now, many people say, well, is this injury thing really that prevalent? I'm just giving you the statistics. And many people say, well, okay, yeah, that's kind of impressive stuff. So we got 4 million students seeking emergency room attention every year in the United States. Another 8 million students are treated for sports injuries per year in clinics and physicians' offices. They don't even go to the ER either because of the money aspect, it's too expensive, or they just don't have the time because it takes so long to get in. So we got 12 million students getting injured every year. And one of the things that we realize with these injuries is they're not little bumps and bruises. A significant percentage of these injuries has significant long-term ramifications associated with them, with long-term healthcare costs associated with them. But many of these injuries, the majority, are preventable. These 12 million kids that are getting injured miss 20 million school days every year. Now look, when a kid misses school, many times the parents miss work because they're having to take care of that injured child. The economic costs on a family and on a business and on society is enormous. That's all the bad news. And many people say, well, does this really affect that many people as it relates to sports? I mean, well, we just talked about the 12 million kids getting injured in sports. 75% of all families in our country have at least one child involved in organized sports. And in some cases, around the world, in some countries, it's up to 90% of families have their kids involved in organized sporting activities. It's a huge problem. As we did the research, and we'll talk about some of these studies, we came to these big conclusions that had potentially big ramifications. But we weren't seeing injury patterns reduce. And folks came to me and said, you know, Dave, you need to tell your story. You need to get your story out. You know, yeah, the media is doing stuff, the Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, you know, all these, they're doing stuff and they're doing pieces on it. But people need to have something in hand to inspire them about pushing ahead and taking on the big brother, if you will. And getting that information in written form so they can utilize this and they can network it. So, I wrote a book. This is the 6th edition of this book, The Awakening of a Surgeon. Its subtitle is A Life of Prevention, Health, and Hope. And it's about a grunt on the front line of healthcare delivery. It's also a family guide to preventing sports injuries and death. And one of my friends characterized it as a weapon of mass instruction. It instructs every person that's willing to look in how they can get control of their healthcare life. I encourage you to get it, either the hard copy or the e-form. And when I wrote this book, some people said to me, just as they said that the Institute, you know, when I founded the Institute, said, you know, Dave, this is going to fail. This is not going to last a month, let alone a year. Well, they were wrong. Yeah, it's taken a lot of perseverance, dedication, sacrifice. But the Institute is almost 30 years old, and we're still making headway in networking our information. When I wrote this book, folks said, you know, Dave, it's not going to sell 100 copies. It's not going to be a big deal. And don't even think of getting on Oprah. Well, this is the 6th edition of this book. And every edition we change a little bit. The contents, the information, the updated statistics. And about not getting on Oprah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. You see, in this book, I have a 20-point prevention checklist of what every person, family, business, community in our country and around the world can do. And it's interesting how I found out about what the power of that 20-point prevention checklist was. An insurance executive called me one day from New York. Said, I want to come meet with you, Janda, and talk to you about this prevention thing. Fair enough. Flew in, walked in the office, sitting at my desk, and he looked at me and said, Janda, let me tell you why we despise you and why we're trying to undermine everything you do in prevention, because you see, you cost our industry money. I looked at him and I said, wait a minute, just one of our studies, according to the federal government independent analysis, will save billions of dollars every year, and we spend very, very small amount of money on that. It's the biggest bang for the buck you can do in prevention. He looked at me and he said, son, you don't understand the insurance industry, or really healthcare industry. You see, son, the higher costs go, the bigger cut of the pie we make. He goes, let's say the cost of insuring you is $1,000. According to the feds, the most we can tack onto that, 7%, so your premium's $1,070. And he goes, let's say we do what you talk about with those 20-point prevention checklists. He goes, actually, we had our actuaries go through it. And they determined that if those 20 points were integrated in every family and every community, well, injuries would go down by so much, and it's such a big problem that the cost of insuring you would go down from $1,000 to $100. And that way your premium would be $107 because 7% of 100 is 7. He goes, now Dr. Janda, doctors are financial morons, but even you can figure this out. Wouldn't you rather have 70 more than 7? He said, you see, the way our formula is created and the way we get paid and the way we make money is the higher costs go, the bigger cut of the pie we get. And that is why you are the Jesse James of healthcare, wanted dead or alive. And I looked at him and I said, look, that business model is really sick. And it's really sinister. But that business model isn't going to hold up because the higher costs go, people are not going to be able to afford it. And if they can't afford it, you will go out of business. And he looked at me and he goes, it's not going to happen in your or my lifetime. And he left the room. That was one of the last conversations I ever had with anybody in the insurance industry. They despise what we do. They hate what we do. And the reason is because it empowers you. It puts your healthcare freedom back in your hands and not the insurance industry hands or big government's hands. This is why big government doesn't support prevention, because prevention empowers the individual, you, the community, the family, the business. But it doesn't empower Big Brother, and it doesn't empower big business. Let's look at the ramifications and the impact prevention and the interventions associated with preventions can help and empower you. One of the questions we asked in the 20-point prevention checklist is do your softball and baseball fields all have breakaway bases? Well, why is that important? Well, it goes back to my initial work at the University of Michigan. I was in the second month of my first year of residency at the University of Michigan. And normally they have a higher level person running trauma in the emergency room, but just so happens a person ended up leaving and I was placed down there. So here I was, the second month of my residency, and here I am in charge of trauma at the University of Michigan hospitals. If you will, triaging every trauma case that came in. And it happened to be the month of August. And I was down there, I realized that I was taking care of a lot of people. But a lot of these folks that were injured from a sports-related problem. And it just so happened, being August and softball and baseball are incredibly popular in Ann Arbor, a lot of folks were coming in with injuries related to softball and baseball. And I'd be up all night taking care of folks with these softball and baseball injuries, not motorcycle injuries or motor vehicle injuries. Yes, they were occurring, but not to the level these sports injuries were, in particular baseball and softball injuries. So I went to the professors in the Department of Orthopedics at the U of M at the time and said, hey, look, has anybody ever looked at these injuries and what's causing them? No, why don't you do that, Dave? So, in my few hours of spare time, I started on a research project. And what I found was that 71% of all injuries in the Ann Arbor community related to softball and baseball were from one mechanism: sliding. That's right, sliding into a fixed, immovable object, the base. So many of these injuries were not just little bumps and bruises and raspberries. I mean, they were really bad injuries. A broken, dislocated wrist, dislocated shoulders, folks sliding in head first, the people sliding in feet first, broken ankles, dislocated ankles, broken tibias, the main shin bone in your shin. We've had a couple hip dislocations. We had a femur fracture. We had ligamentous injuries to the knee. Huge injuries. And that's one of the fallacies about sports injuries. Oh, they're little short-term events. They don't carry with them long-term ramifications. Wrong. Many of these injuries are significant events. They carry with them significant long-term medical ramifications and disability ramifications and cost ramifications. So we determined the first phase of the study, 71% of all injuries were related to sliding. So I went to my professors at the U of M Department of Orthopedics and said, okay, why don't we try to prevent these injuries? And a couple of them were like, okay, Dave, start to look at that. But some of them were, hey, just take care of the person after they get injured, and just let's move on. Well, yeah, we take care of them. We do a really good job taking care of people after they were injured. But I decided, hey, let's look at the prevention side of the equation. And the professors at the time who inspired me on the prevention side of the equation were Dr. Fred Hankin, Dr. Bob Hensinger, and Dr. Dean Lewis. They'd been around the block a number of times. And they said, you know what? This is worthwhile. And you know what? If it wasn't for them and them telling me to pursue it, I don't know, maybe I would have dropped it at that point. That was years before what happened to Allison. But I pursued it. And so what we did is we thought this was going to be simple. I did anyway. I said, okay, well, if sliding is the main problem, it's leading to injury, 71% of all injuries, it's easy. Let's just abolish sliding. If you slide, you're out. So we took that to the organizational leagues in the Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan communities, and they all looked at me and they go, no. And here's where you get into the traditionalism of sport. Folks looked at me and go, are you like Lennon's grandchild? I mean, this is the national pastime you're trying to change. Now, when they said Lennon's grandchild, they didn't mean John Lennon from the Beatles. They meant V.I. Lenin, you know, the big guy from Russia, Soviet Union. So no, I wasn't his grandchild, but obviously that wasn't going to work. And people said, if you abolish sliding, we're leaving the leagues. Okay, so that didn't work. So the second thing we tried is we had a legend in the baseball community, Moby Benedict, who was the former U of M baseball coach for decades, who is now running these leagues, these intramural leagues and these leagues around the city. And we approached Moby. Moby was a technician. He was great on teaching techniques. And we said, Moby, can you teach people, and if you hold these courses on teaching people how to slide so they don't get injured? Because the common denominator in these injuries, when we talked to folks that were injured, it was a late decision to slide. I'm not going to slide. I'm going to slide. Oh, okay, I'm going to slide. And when they slide, they were ramming their leg, their arms into this fixed immovable object, this base that we tend to think is a little iceberg, but in fact, or we think of it as a pillow. It's not a pillow, as I mentioned, it's an iceberg. That little white pillow is bolted in a metal ground and sunk into the ground into concrete. It's a boulder out there. So we had Moby hold instructional courses. Now here's where you get into compliance. Compliance is a willingness to go along with either a treatment or a recommendation that's made to you medically. People weren't showing up to the courses. Moby was teaching them, he was doing a great job. Very few people showed up. Our injury patterns didn't decrease. So the abolish sliding thing was an abysmal failure. The holding the courses on instructional courses on sliding was an abysmal failure because people didn't show up. So then I started doing research on, okay, well, wait a minute. And when you think in prevention terms, because we're not taught to think this way, okay? We're all taught to be reactive. We aren't taught to be proactive. And this is something that can be utilized in every aspect of your life. Thinking proactively. It's key. It'll keep you out of a lot of trouble. Trust me. Or if you know you're going to get in trouble, it can help you kind of sift through the trouble before it actually starts to hit. That tends to happen when you got a mouth like mine shooting it off all the time. So you think backwards when you think being preventive or proactive. Here's what I mean. So if someone's sliding late into a base, and at the end of the result, the leg is broken, but the base is whole, then why not reverse the process and make it so that if somebody slides late into the base breaks, but the person is whole? Breakaway bases. And at the time, there were a number of bases out there, and we looked at them, and we did some preliminary testing in the laboratory, and we actually found there was only one that actually reduced the force of impact significantly. It was called the Rogers breakaway base. Now look, I have no financial tie to that company. That's not why I recommend it. That's not why we tested it. I've never had a financial tie. No one in my family has ever. Nobody on the research team has. There's nothing. This is clean. Which a lot of people have a hard time getting their heads around, especially in the business world. They keep trying to figure out, how's he making money off? Nothing. Zero. Zero. So what we did is we called the inventor of the base, his name was Roger Hall, said, hey, we'd like to run a study at the University of Michigan, change half the fields over to your breakaway bases, keep the other half stationary, and run a study. Well, it was interesting. He goes, well, I've been trying to get people to do this for years. I invented this base 16 years ago, and it's just sat on a shelf. And thank you very much for calling. And yes, I'll send you out some bases, and yeah, okay. And let me know how it turns out, but I hope it turns out well. So we ran a study over 2 years at the University of Michigan fields. We changed half the fields over to breakaway bases. Now, this type of breakaway base, because this is important, because there has been significant misrepresentation on what base was used in these studies. We used the Rogers base. So think of it this way. It's a rubber mat, and off the rubber mat come these rubber thumbs, or what's called grommets. And on the breakaway portion of the base, it looks just like a stationary base, but you flip it over, it has these receiving holes, and they snap on over these little thumbs or grommets. And there's a youth model, a teen model, adult model, pro model, and the difference between all those is how much force it takes to pop off and how hard it is. Okay, so we changed half the fields over to the Rogers breakaway base, kept the other half stationary. We ran a study, and what we found was we reduced injuries by 96%. 96% reduction of injuries. And we also had folks, and the way we monitored the injuries, we have 2 emergency rooms in Ann Arbor. We have the University of Michigan Hospital and St. Joseph's Mercy Hospital. We had the University of Michigan Health Services, and we had private practitioners keeping track that we would follow on a weekly basis about folks coming in with injuries, and we'd follow up with the people that were injured. 96% reduction of injuries, and because we also had them keep track of their healthcare logs over time, a 99% reduction in healthcare costs. The 2 people that were injured on breakaway bases were injured with a slight ankle sprain, no breaks, no fractures, no dislocations. So the 45 people that we found in this study that were injured from stationary bases ran up bills of over $55,000. And the 2 people injured on breakaway bases, 2 ankle sprains, ran up bills of $700. A 99% reduction. That study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. That's the only positive stroke we ever had from the American Medical Association. They published the study on an expedited basis in JAMA. After that, it was hands off. It's interesting, though. That study got the attention of a lot of folks in the media at the time, but also the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they contacted me and they said, Dr. Janda, will you send all your data down to us in Atlanta, and we want to run it through this actuarial analysis and determine what this means nationally. And they did, and they concluded that if all fields in the United States were switched from stationary to breakaway bases, it would prevent 1.7 million people from being injured every year and save $2 billion, with a B, $2 billion in healthcare costs every year. That's not a bang for the buck, that's a sonic boom for the buck. Now here's the interesting thing, folks. We spent, now granted there was a lot of gratis time, but we spent $1,000 on that series of studies. $1,000, and it saves 1.7 million people every year from going to the emergency room, and saves $2 billion in healthcare costs. And when it comes to prevention, that's not the exception to the rule. It is the rule. A very small outlay in expenditures has a significant ramifications at reducing injury, at reducing disability, at reducing healthcare costs. Yet, it remains the most underfunded aspect of medical research in our world. It's interesting, after that study was published and after the CDC did their deal, I was invited by Congress to testify to Congress about the ramifications of prevention, which actually was a good thing. The ramifications of that testimony were interesting. Based on that testimony, every military installation in the world, U.S., penitentiary system, and government overseen facility changed to breakaway bases, and injuries plummeted. Yet, if we did an analysis right now of fields in our country that have breakaway bases, it's about 20%. So here's what I have to live with. 20% of society is benefiting from our research, when 100% could be benefiting. Yet, every federal penitentiary inmate, including Charles Manson, is benefiting 100% from our research. The question is, Dave, if this is such a great idea, why only 20% of fields have it? Well, a couple of reasons. One is breakaway bases cost more. They cost about double. But what we actually found is when the leagues that implement and utilize breakaway bases contact their insurance companies, because they reduce injury so much, the insurance companies are forced to reduce the premiums, which is why the insurance companies hate what we do. So they actually don't cost more. The second reason is there was some misrepresentation of our research. Remember, I told you a specific base we used. The other bases didn't stack up in our laboratory analysis, so we only used the Rogers base. About 6 months after our studies were published, I started getting all these phone calls from people saying, we used that breakaway base system that you used in your study that utilizes magnets, and it didn't work. I contacted these folks back and I said, of course it didn't work. We didn't use the type that used magnets, because if dirt and water gets in between the magnets, they're unstable. Why do you think we use that base in our study? Well, because there's this ad all over it with your name on it saying this is the base you used and this is the base you endorsed. They said, fax me those ads. And they did. I contacted the company. They were based in Canada. They put those ads out. I said, this is misrepresentative. You're hurting people. You're utilizing our research that did not involve your product. Stop it. I always remember this conversation. Janda, you should be grateful for the free advertising, because we put out 50,000 of these ads all over the United States and Canada, and we didn't charge you for the free advertising. I kid you not. Now, what did I do? Well, unfortunately for those goons, my wife is a practicing attorney. And we took him to federal district court, and that story is actually in the book. It's actually kind of a funny story once we got in the courtroom. I'll leave it to you to read about it. We took him to federal district court, and we won. And we won big. It was Judge Godola. Thank you, Judge Godola. And we won big. Huge judgment. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. This will be the funding for the Institute, finally. This will serve us for decades. The problem is that unreputable company filed bankruptcy in the United States and never paid us a penny. They kept producing their base up in Canada. And they said, you know what? You won down in the United States, come get us in Canada, you won't. Well, we did. The problem with what we experienced in the Canadian legal system is that when you win, which we did initially, the other side, without citing any problem with the law that was not interpreted correctly, which happens in an appeal in the United States, you can just say, well, I lost, I appeal. And they did. They kept doing it. And it went all the way up to the Canadian Supreme Court. And it just so happens that the day before we went to the Canadian Supreme Court, our legal counsel had an emergency medical event and died. So who are the ultimate losers in that situation? Yeah, the Institute, because we never got a penny from these guys. We never got any significant amount of money from them. It was ridiculous. But the ultimate losers are you. The few organizations initially that were willing to tie into the prevention wagon, jump on it, got burned by fraudulent advertising. You see, as I've always said, big business does not support what we do, but what's even worse is they undermine what we do. And the reason is because they don't care about people or society. They only care about one thing. That one thing is money. When we come back in the next segment, we're going to talk about the number one reason of folks dying in sport, in particular kids, and what can be done to prevent